It had been a quiet few weeks in Washington, D.C., an almost eerie calm before the storm. The media was buzzing with the usual gossip, pundits were weighing in on the latest polling numbers, and the political landscape was beginning to settle into the familiar patterns of another presidential race. But behind the scenes, something was stirring. Former President Donald Trump had been keeping a low profile, at least publicly. His rallies had been sparse, and he had spent most of his time building a powerful network of allies, strategizing, and laying the groundwork for something monumental. There were whispers, though. Whispers of a power move, the kind of move that only someone like Trump could pull off. People were waiting, and they knew it was coming. For months, political insiders speculated about what Trump would do next. Some believed he was preparing to announce his candidacy for 2024 with an unprecedented bang, while others thought he might play a more calculated game, waiting until the perfect moment to strike. Whatever it was, everyone knew one thing for sure: Trump had never been one to play it safe. Then, just as the political world was starting to settle into its familiar rhythm, Trump did what everyone knew he was capable of doing. It was bold, it was brash, and it was a game-changer. The headlines hit like a thunderclap, boom. Trump just played the power move everyone knew was coming. It came out of nowhere. The email hit inboxes just after 10 a.m. It was short, to the point, and packed a punch that no one saw coming. The subject line alone sent shockwaves through the political world: Trump 2024, the plan for America's future. Within minutes, the press release was all over Twitter, news outlets, and cable networks. Trump wasn't just making a statement, he was making a power move that turned the entire race upside down. In bold, capitalized text, it read, "Today, I announce my candidacy for the 2024 presidential election. But that's not all. I'm not just running, I'm taking control of the party. I've secured the support of key figures across the country, and together, we will put America first once again." The words "taking control of the party" sent shockwaves through the Republican establishment. Trump wasn't merely announcing his candidacy, he was signaling that he was ready to fully seize the reins of the GOP, no holds barred. The backlash was immediate. Moderate Republicans and those who had hoped for a new direction felt the floor fall out from under them. Rhinos, Republicans in name only, scrambled to distance themselves from the former president. The media immediately began speculating about the fallout. Would this be the final chapter of the Trump era? Or was it the beginning of something even more dangerous for his opponents? But for Trump's supporters, this was the moment they had been waiting for. The political establishment, both left and right, was in a frenzy. Trump's announcement wasn't just an ordinary campaign launch, it was a declaration of war. The ripple effect was immediate and intense. On the left, the Democratic Party was already preparing for the backlash. They had spent the last few years tightening their grip on the narrative, positioning themselves as the party of progress. But now, with Trump back in the game, everything was about to shift. Democrats immediately began hammering their usual points: Trump was a danger to democracy, a divisive figure, and the architect of chaos. Yet even they couldn't deny the power of his base. Meanwhile, in the Republican camp, things were anything but united. For those who had hoped for a clean break from Trump's divisive influence, this was a nightmare. Several high-profile GOP figures, including former governors and senators, scrambled to respond. Some chose silence, hoping the storm would blow over, while others attacked Trump head-on, calling his move a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. The GOP was now in full disarray. The party's leadership was in turmoil, unsure of how to handle Trump's overwhelming dominance. Then, just as things were heating up, Trump dropped the next bombshell. A series of social media posts revealed a carefully curated list of endorsements from powerful Republican figures. These weren't just any endorsements, these were high-ranking party operatives, governors, and key figures from the conservative movement. They were pledging their allegiance to him, signaling that his control over the GOP was already solidified. The media coverage was relentless. Headlines screamed in every direction: "Trump's back, and he's stronger than ever." The question on everyone's mind was no longer if Trump could win, it was how much power he could consolidate before the general election. As Trump's influence in the Republican Party grew stronger by the day, his rivals were not about to back down without a fight. The Republican establishment, already reeling from his bombshell announcement, began scrambling to mount a counterattack. The first major challenge came from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis, once thought of as Trump's protege, had been building his own political brand as a more moderate alternative, someone who could carry on Trump's legacy without the chaos and divisiveness. But now, with Trump in full force, DeSantis had to make his move. He took to social media, making a direct appeal to the GOP voters who were looking for something new. "I've always put Florida first, and I will continue to do so. The party needs leadership that can bring us together, not divide us. It's time to move beyond the divisiveness of the past." It was a clean, crisp message, one that tried to set him apart from Trump's populist rhetoric. But the response was tepid at best. Many saw it as weak, a hollow attempt to appeal to moderate Republicans who were too scared to fully break away from Trump's power. Trump, of course, wasn't about to let this go unnoticed. Within hours, his team released a scathing response, targeting DeSantis directly. "Governor DeSantis can talk all he wants about unity, but he is just another establishment politician. He hasn't fought for the people like I have. He won't win. Trust me." Trump's words were sharp, biting, and it was clear he wasn't about to let any challengers easily take his place. But the real shocker came when a new contender entered the fray, Senator Ted Cruz, who had once been one of Trump's fiercest primary rivals, suddenly threw his hat back into the ring. Cruz, knowing that DeSantis might be the moderate choice, went all in on the populist appeal, doubling down on Trump's themes of border security, national pride, and anti-elitism. The GOP was now officially divided, and the battle for the soul of the Republican Party had begun. Trump's power move had sparked chaos within his own ranks. Everyone was jockeying for position, but one thing was clear: no one was going to get a free pass anymore. As the Republican field grew more crowded, Trump's campaign team had no intention of letting the chaos slow them down. If anything, it played right into their hands. The more infighting there was among his rivals, the more the focus shifted to Trump as the definitive leader of the GOP. But Trump wasn't just relying on media attention and endorsements. His team had been preparing something far more strategic, an infrastructure that could not only win him the 2024 election but also secure his dominance within the Republican Party for years to come. The next step in his plan was a nationwide tour. This wasn't just a series of rallies, it was a carefully orchestrated movement designed to shake up the political landscape in a way that would make his rivals look irrelevant. Trump was going straight to the heart of battleground states, holding massive rallies in key cities where his base was strongest. But this time, he wasn't just preaching to the choir, he was making strategic appearances in regions where the GOP had struggled in recent years, like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona. Trump's rallies were as massive and rowdy as ever. The crowds chanted his name, waving signs that declared, "Trump 2024, Make America Great Again Again." But behind the scenes, Trump's team had been quietly building an unprecedented grassroots network, recruiting volunteers, and organizing events across the country. The goal was clear: to create a volunteer army that could outmatch anything his opponents had. The contrast between Trump's strategy and the tactics of his rivals couldn't have been starker. While DeSantis focused on smooth, polished speeches in front of small, select audiences, and Cruz tried to rally his base through televised appearances and carefully crafted policy speeches, Trump was creating an army in the streets. His campaign wasn't just digital or on the airwaves, it was boots on the ground. By the time his competitors realized what was happening, it was already too late. Trump's base was energized, his messaging was relentless, and his media strategy was once again dominating the conversation. In the eyes of many, Trump was the candidate for 2024, no question about it. And as the media continued to churn out headline after headline, one thing became abundantly clear: Trump had played the ultimate power move. He had used the chaos around him to secure not just the nomination, but a position of unchallenged authority in his party. Just when it seemed like Trump had cemented his dominance over the Republican Party, he made the move that would change the entire trajectory of the 2024 race. This wasn't a speech or a rally, it was a carefully timed, jaw-dropping public statement that took everyone by surprise. Trump called an emergency press conference in the heart of Washington, D.C., right in front of the Capitol. The media stormed in, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, and speculation running wild. What could he possibly have planned now? When Trump stepped up to the podium, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He went straight for the jugular. The time for playing nice is over. I'm not just running for president anymore. I'm running to save America from the people who've been selling us out for years. These career politicians, Democrats and Republicans alike, are only interested in keeping their power. They don't care about you. But I do. And I'll do whatever it takes to take back control of this country. The crowd erupted into applause. This was Trump at his most unapologetic, and it was clear that the audience was with him. But then, he said the words that would make this press conference unforgettable. Today, I announce that I'm bringing something back that the political elite thought was dead, the Trump wall. And no, I don't mean a physical wall, I'm talking about the political wall. No more backroom deals, no more secret handshakes, no more giving up American interests for the sake of globalism. I'm building a wall around Washington, D.C., and we're going to keep it for the people. This time, we're doing it right. For a moment, the room was stunned into silence. What did he mean by that? Was he truly declaring war on the establishment? Was this a new approach to his populist movement, one that would turn politics upside down in a way no one had ever imagined? The pundits began to scramble. Political insiders began asking each other, what does this mean for the rest of the race? The Democrats were furious, their attacks on Trump intensifying. The GOP establishment was reeling, unsure of how to respond. But Trump's message had landed, he wasn't just running for president. He was preparing for an all-out battle for the future of the nation. It was clear now, this was no longer just about winning an election. Trump was trying to reshape the very fabric of American politics. Trump's political wall declaration had set the entire political world on fire. The media was ablaze with questions, debates, and endless commentary. For the Democrats, it was clear, Trump was once again the wild card in the game, and they weren't about to let him redefine the conversation. But in a strange twist, the more they attacked, the more his base seemed to rally around him. In the days following the press conference, the Democrats ramped up their campaign against Trump, calling him everything from a fascist to a dictator. Speeches were held, advertisements launched, and TV appearances were filled with condemnation. President Joe Biden, struggling with his own approval ratings and under pressure from his party, delivered a televised address denouncing Trump's rhetoric as dangerous for the soul of the nation. The attack was blunt, Donald Trump's vision for America is one of division, not unity. His wall is not a solution, it's a call for chaos. However, this backfired. The more Trump's opponents in Washington condemned him, the more it solidified his support among his base. His rallies were filled to the brim with chanting crowds, waving signs that read, "Build the wall," not just as a literal promise, but as a symbol of resistance against the establishment. It was a rallying cry, and it resonated deeply. Polls began to reflect this surge. Trump's numbers were skyrocketing, even in places where he had lost ground in the past. Key swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, which had been leaning toward the Democrats, were now moving back into his column. In states that were traditionally deep red, Trump was enjoying unprecedented levels of enthusiasm. The base that had once been seen as a fringe element now felt fully empowered. The message was clear, Trump wasn't just a political figure, he was a movement. But the real turning point came when Trump, in a surprise move, began to recruit new faces to his campaign. It wasn't just about politicians anymore. He started pulling in heavyweights from the business world, successful entrepreneurs, former military leaders, and even some celebrities who were known for their unapologetic support of his brand of politics. These new figures weren't just endorsing him, they were becoming part of his coalition. One such figure was legendary businessman and philanthropist Robert Mercer, a deep-pocketed financier with ties to powerful conservative movements. Mercer made a public statement pledging his financial support to Trump's campaign, adding legitimacy and massive funding to the already well-oiled machine. Even more surprising was the endorsement of General Michael Flynn, who had been a controversial figure in the past, but now seemed to be fully aligned with Trump's vision. His message of loyalty and patriotism struck a chord with many former military supporters, and it was a pivotal moment in solidifying Trump's populist base as both fiercely loyal and deeply organized. The momentum was undeniable. Trump wasn't just playing the game anymore, he was changing the rules entirely. As the 2024 election loomed ever closer, the political landscape had transformed entirely. The Republican Party was no longer just the home of establishment politicians. It was now, unmistakably, the kingdom of Donald Trump. Every move he made, every word he uttered, sent shockwaves across the nation. And as his base continued to swell, so too did the animosity between Trump and his rivals. The battle lines were drawn. Trump's challengers were facing mounting pressure. Ron DeSantis, who had once been seen as the future of the GOP, found himself unable to match Trump's overwhelming momentum. The more DeSantis tried to make inroads with moderate Republicans, the more his efforts seemed like a pale imitation of Trump's vision. His polished speeches and well-manicured campaign simply couldn't compete with the raw energy and authenticity of the Trump movement. Every time he took a jab at Trump, it felt like an empty gesture, a desperate attempt to reignite a battle that had already been lost. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz, still clinging to his status as a stalwart conservative, attempted to shift the conversation to policy and principles. He tried to position himself as the true defender of American values, standing against both the left and what he called the deep state. But his rhetoric, while fiery, lacked the grassroots appeal that Trump had cultivated. Cruz's speeches started to sound repetitive, his strategies felt outdated, and it was clear he had lost the fight for the Republican soul to Trump's relentless populism. But Trump wasn't just focusing on his opponents within the party. He was also carefully monitoring the media, skillfully manipulating the narrative to keep himself at the center of the conversation. His use of social media was masterful, keeping his supporters engaged and energized while simultaneously launching brutal attacks on Biden and the Democrats. His infamous tweets were back, though now, instead of simple statements, they came with political consequences. Every word he posted had a ripple effect. On one day, he might target Hunter Biden's business dealings, the next, he would unleash a tirade against the fake news media. But what made it all so powerful wasn't just the content, it was the sheer volume and consistency. Trump was everywhere, constantly driving the narrative and dictating the terms of the debate. His opponents couldn't keep up. Then came the presidential debate, a moment that would be the defining test of the race. Trump walked into that stage with the confidence of a lion, knowing full well that he held the keys to the future of the party. His challengers, meanwhile, were fighting for relevance. DeSantis, Cruz, and the others struggled to land a blow. Trump's jabs were sharp, his wit quick, and his presence overpowering. Every time one of his opponents tried to bring up a policy difference, Trump cut them off with an exasperated, "We've heard this before. No one cares about your plans. They want results. And I get results." The audience erupted into applause. Trump had once again reduced the debate to a circus, and it was clear who the ringmaster was. By the time the debate concluded, the narrative was clear: Trump wasn't just running for president, he was reshaping the Republican Party into his own image, and no one was in a position to stop him. With the debate behind him, Trump's grip on the Republican nomination seemed unbreakable. His rivals, though still defiant, were now in full retreat, trying to salvage what little they could from the wreckage of their campaigns. But it was clear that Trump had won. His populist movement had outlasted the attacks, the opposition, and the chaos. As the general election neared, the focus turned to one thing: the showdown between Trump and President Joe Biden. The tension was palpable. On the one side, Biden, struggling with his approval ratings and facing an increasingly fractured Democratic Party. On the other, Trump, a political force of nature who had upended every expectation and rallied a base of unprecedented size and enthusiasm. Biden's campaign tried to stay optimistic, but it was becoming harder to ignore the rising tide of discontent. Biden's approval numbers were teetering, with growing concerns about the economy, inflation, and national security. His popularity with younger voters, once a cornerstone of his political strength, was rapidly eroding. The Democrats were now on defense, attempting to fend off Trump's relentless attacks while trying to unite their fractured coalition. But the party's internal struggles, exacerbated by infighting and disarray, made it difficult to mount an effective counteroffensive. Trump, however, was operating at full speed. His rallies were bigger than ever, filling stadiums across the country with frenzied supporters chanting his name. The energy at these events was electric. Trump's base was not just enthusiastic, they were fervent, convinced that their leader could win the White House back and drain the swamp once and for all. Trump's promise of a political wall that would insulate him from the traditional political structures now seemed less like a slogan and more like a reality. But there was one more twist that Trump had up his sleeve, a final power move that no one saw coming. In a last-minute campaign event in the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania, Trump unveiled a list of endorsements that would send shockwaves through the political world. This was no ordinary list. It included the names of influential Democratic figures, governors, mayors, and high-profile labor leaders, who were now publicly declaring their support for Trump. The media was stunned. The Democrats were blindsided. This was not just a defection from the party, it was a stampede. These were people who had once sworn fealty to the Democratic cause, but now, they were crossing the aisle to support Trump. It was the ultimate defection, one that no one had predicted, and it played into Trump's narrative of breaking the political machine. Trump's strategy had worked. He wasn't just winning the Republicans, he was breaking down the walls between party lines and proving that he was the true candidate of change. The final weeks before Election Day were nothing short of a political spectacle. Trump, with his unstoppable momentum, had transcended the traditional party lines. His rallies had grown into mass movements, his endorsements had reshaped the map, and his campaign had effectively neutralized all challengers. It was no longer a matter of whether he would win the Republican nomination, it was whether he would make history as the most disruptive force in modern politics. As Election Day approached, the country was on edge. Polls fluctuated, and the political pundits, who had once predicted Trump's inevitable downfall, were now starting to hedge their bets. Trump's base, which had once been seen as a fringe element, was now the beating heart of the nation's political landscape. His supporters were passionate, loyal, and ready to turn out in droves. President Biden's campaign, on the other hand, was increasingly rattled. His speeches, once filled with optimism, now carried a tone of desperation. He leaned heavily into the narrative that Trump was a danger to democracy, but the more he attacked, the more it seemed to feed into Trump's narrative of an out-of-touch establishment. Biden's final push to rally younger voters had fallen flat, and the divisions within his own party had only widened. The final debate was a disaster for Biden. Trump, with his sharp tongue and commanding presence, destroyed any semblance of momentum Biden had left. The moderators tried to maintain order, but Trump bulldozed through every question, turning it into a showcase of his dominance and wit. The media couldn't help but cover every punch Trump threw, while Biden struggled to keep pace. By the end of the debate, it was clear who the victor was. Trump had turned the final stretch of the race into a victory lap. On Election Day, the world was watching. Voters lined up in record numbers, waiting for their chance to cast their ballots. The country was divided, but it was Trump's supporters who were energized like never before. It was a wave of red, from coast to coast, as Trump's message had galvanized millions. When the results began to pour in, it became evident that the country was choosing a new direction. The battleground states, once thought to be out of reach, had flipped in Trump's favor. His base had turned out in massive numbers, and the defection of key Democratic figures to Trump's camp had tilted the scales. The final electoral count was decisive. Donald Trump had done the unthinkable. He had not only reclaimed the presidency, he had dismantled the political establishment. His victory was a repudiation of both parties' old guard. It was a clear message that the old way of doing politics was over. Trump had emerged victorious, not just as the leader of the Republican Party but as a symbol of a new era, one where the political machine could be torn down, and the will of the people could reign supreme. As Trump stood at the podium on election night, the cameras flashed, and the world watched. His speech was simple, but it carried the weight of 1,000 battles fought and won. Thank you, America. We've just made history. And together, we're going to take this country back. The wall is up. And we've won the fight. The crowd erupted into wild applause. It was over. Trump had played the power move that everyone knew was coming, and he had won. The game had changed. And the political world would never be the same again.